Rocky Horror Picture Show is one of the most iconic names that come to mind when you think of the words double feature. For some of us, it feels like a pillar of our identity. Even if you only stumbled into it through a random musical theater mention or late-night doom-scrolling rabbit hole, Rocky Horror has a way of finding you. And when it does, it feels like a mirror. A weird, absurd, flirtatious, spicy, dangerous, infinite Halloween party mirror. But why? Why do so many artsy, sexually repressed people feel instantly at home in it? Hi and welcome to Be Honest. My name is Milena and I've always wanted to find a more recent take on Rocky Horror Picture Show here on YouTube. So with the 50-year anniversary and Halloween right around the corner,
look at all these basketballs.
I feel like this is the best moment in time to open a discussion on what makes this musical and movie so addictive to so many open-minded individuals with each new generation.
I see you shiver with anticipation.
Now, this is not going to be yet another summary to the well-known cult classic. Rather, this is going to be an explanation to what instances created Rocky Horror, what it meant to the greater theater culture, and a psychological dive into what makes it a very valid cornerstone to the youth that discovers it, and why it always has such a strong grasp on defining their aesthetic and personality. So, what makes Rocky Horror still a cult classic with a very alive fan base today? So let's start with a little bit of context first. What is a double feature? A double feature was when a movie theater showed two films back to back for the price of one ticket. You'd pay once and you'd stay in your seat and get twice the entertainment, usually one main movie and then a lower budget B movie. So when Rocky Horror starts with science fiction double feature, it's referencing those mid-20th century nights where you'd catch two pulpy sci-fi or horror flicks in a row, flying saucers, mad scientists, giant creatures, and all the campy gold. This practice became very popular during the Great Depression in the 1930s. Movie theaters were struggling because people couldn't afford tickets, so they started bundling two movies to lure audiences in. You would often get a big studio A movie with stars and production value that reflects an A movie, and then a B movie, lower budget, shorter, genre-based, often horror, western, or sci-fi. By the 1940s, 50s, this became a standard part of movie-going experience, especially at small or independent theaters. For audiences, you get twice the content for the same price, a whole evening's entertainment. You could escape reality for like 2 or 4 hours, depending on how much you'd get for your buck. While for studios and theaters, the smaller studios like Monogram or Republic Pictures got to showcase their cheap B pictures alongside with big releases. Theaters would fill long programming slots and sell more snacks. But the fun part was that the B-movie half double features shaped pop culture. These films were low budget and often unintentionally campy, filled with outlandish plots, mutants, space invasions, forbidden experiments. Culturally, they became the breeding ground for cult cinema. The kind of playful, over-the-top stuff that Rocky Horror later celebrated. So when Rocky Horror opens with science fiction double feature, it's not just nostalgia. It's a wink to that whole era of cheap thrills, forbidden fun, and campy rebellion that defined outsider youth culture in the mid-20th century. I mean, double features were all about getting more than what you paid for, stretching boundaries, indulging in fantasy, and blurring high and low culture. And that's exactly what Rocky Horror does. It's an A-movie experience built out of B-movie DNA. It takes those old tropes, the mad scientist, the muscle man, the innocent couple, and explodes them into a queer, glitter-drenched liberation ritual. Now, surprisingly, Rocky Horror Picture Show wasn't originally released as a double feature in a traditional way, but its midnight movies and revival culture function exactly like the spirit of the double feature, and sometimes really included them. When the Rocky Horror Picture Show premiered in 1975, it was treated as a normal single film released by the 20th Century Fox. Now the problem is, it flopped hard in its early screenings. Theaters didn't know what to do with it. Audiences were confused, some even walked out. Now, Rocky Horror is a double feature in spirit. The opening number, science fiction double feature, literally frames the movie as one of those vintage B-movies you'd see in a grindhouse theater. It self-consciously becomes both movies of a double bill at once. One half a parody of the 1950s sci-fi horror, and the other a sexual liberation musical. You get both experiences in one, hence why it feels like a cultural double feature of innocence and transgression. Repression. Now let's talk about how it came to be. The whole thing began with Richard O'Brien, an out-of-work actor and musician in London in the early 70s. He loved 1950s sci-fi and horror B-movies, glam rock as in David Bowie, T-Rex, and Alice Cooper, and androgyny and camp theater in general. So while unemployed, he started writing a weird little musical that mixed all of that together. A spoof celebration of B-movie tropes, sexual freedom, and rock and roll energy.
And what he's done is, I think, something quite extraordinary, which is very similar to the actual plot, in that he's taken elements from many other things. He's taken sort of certain 50s elements, certain 60s elements, and put them together, but actually come out with something that's sort of completely unique.
Originally, it was meant to just entertain friends. He called it They Came from Denton High, but later renamed it The Rocky Horror Show. But what was the social context? When O'Brien started writing Rocky Horror Picture Show around 1972-1973, Britain was in a serious decline. The economy was in crisis. Inflation, strikes, oil shortages, mass employment, unemployment. Goddamn, I wish it was mass employment. The swinging 60s dream had crashed massively. There was a generational divide. Older generation clung to traditional values while youth faced no real future. People were angry, bored, and disillusioned. The fringe theater became an outlet for rebellion and absurdity. So while others were writing about grim realism, O'Brien responded by going full absurd. Sci-fi, drag, glitter, and laughter in the face of decay. He basically said, if the world's falling apart, might as well do the time warp. By the early 70s, the sexual revolution, which kind of began in the late 60s, was in full swing. Contraception was more available, gay rights were being discussed openly because homosexuality was decriminalized in England in 1967, and glam rockers like David Bowie, Mark Bolan, and Roxy Music were blurring gender lines on stage. O'Brien, who's bisexual and gender non-conforming long before it was mainstream, absorbed that energy. Frank-N-Furter became an exaggerated avatar of the liberation, an apologetic, pansexual god of pleasure and chaos. The glam movement was everything in the 70s. Let me get this straight. Men in makeup, sequins, platform boots. Music that mixed sex, sci-fi, and rebellion. And style over structure. Performative identity. Performative men today don't know about their roots.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no.
Artists like David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust were directly influencing O'Brien. He once said he wanted Rocky Horror to feel like a comic book glam rock musical where the freaks were the heroes and the norms were dull. It's no coincidence that the film looks like it was shot inside of a glitter bomb. London's underground scene in the early 70s was chaotic and experimental. Theater of the absurd and performative art were breaking rules. Directors like Jim Sherman, we'll talk about him, who later directed the show, were known for experimental and anti-establishment theater. And last but not least, the punk attitude, anyone can make art, was just emerging. O'Brien wasn't a polished writer or composer. The outsider quality matched the punk ideals: DIY, loud, unapologetic, imperfect, and honest. And if you're liking this video, or I don't know, consider maybe subscribing to be honest. That was a bit of a shameless plug, but isn't this punk? I guess it is.
I'm not a good musician, but I think that might be a strength because it stops you being clever, because I know a lot of musicians socially, and I know a lot of them sort of quite envy the way, I mean, not badly, but they do envy the way that I can knock out a simple tune, you know, because I like all artists are concerned with technique, and the technique, I think, sometimes gets in the way, you know.
And while Britain had technically legalized homosexuality, it was not socially accepted. Queer people were marginalized, mocked, and forced underground. Isn't this like today? I mean, not as much, obviously, but in Eastern Europe, where I'm at, that's still definitely the case. I worked in underground theater for a year, where we had queer events, so it's still underground, baby. Why am I so slouched, though? Why am I on a ladder? Nobody has figured it out yet. I'm just gonna keep on asking. Why am I on a ladder? Anyways, Rocky Horror created a camp space where queerness was celebrated, not hidden. The monsters were sexy and powerful, and straight characters like Brad and Janet were the ones who needed awakening. Basically, it flipped the power dynamic of the 1950s films it parodied, where the monsters were othered. Here, the normal people were the ones who didn't belong. Traditional Britain, the empire, the church, the keep calm and carry on was dying. The youth were rejecting all of it, but didn't have a clear replacement. So they turned to fantasy, parody, and rebellion. O'Brien used Rocky Horror to laugh at the collapse, to reclaim power through the chaos and desire. And here, director Jim Sherman, mentioned before with the anti-establishment and experimental theater, who'd worked with O'Brien before on Jesus Christ Superstar, heard the songs and loved them. He convinced a small London theater, the Royal Court Theatre upstairs, thank you for making history, to stage it as a late-night show in 1973. The theater only seated about 60 people, which maybe for London it's little, but for where I'm at, 60 is like the capacity of the theater I currently work at. So it's decent. Some would say it's small. I'd say it's okay. Still works. And the actors performed practically on top of the audience. It was loud, raw, funny, and outrageously sexual. Nothing like the prim, proper British theater scene at the time. That was my mouse, because I have a hidden mouse with which I'm scrolling my script and it just fell. It fell into the abyss. Where did it go? Found it, found the mouse. And no, I don't have a sponsor for this video, but you could still engage with the video if you want to support me. Thank you. And it exploded. Yeah, it exploded. People lined down the street. It moved to bigger venues, to King's Road Theatre, then to the Comedy Theatre in the West End, and it became the place to be. Punk, queer, and glam culture all mixed together there. And it came at the perfect moment in time, because like I said earlier, Britain was in post-60s social breakdown, was glam rock and sexual revolution right at their height. People wanted theater to break boundaries, and Rocky Horror became a communal rebellion, an invitation to stop pretending and start playing.
Here we go. Play back. I'll get you a
Now, I wrote it first of all for myself to while away the long winter nights when I was out of work. And I did a play at the Royal Court Theatre upstairs, and Jim directed it, and I mentioned it to him that I was writing it. I hadn't even finished it. And he heard some of the songs and read the script that I'd got, as much as I'd got. And I just had to actually sort of round it off, resolve the whole story and round it off. And it was done at the theatre upstairs. There was no sort of hardship with it, really. It just all happened, really.
And because of that, obviously, Hollywood had to step in. Because they always do. Hollywood producers, particularly Lou Adler, who owned Roxy Theatre in LA, saw the show in London and wanted to bring it to film. They flew the cast to Los Angeles to perform at the Roxy in 1974, where it was a hit with celebrities and counterculture icons. Fox greenlit the movie adaptation almost immediately, on a small budget though, about $1.4 million, and with mostly the original cast of the musical. So the movie now had Tim Curry as Dr. Frank-N-Furter, Richard O'Brien as Riff Raff, Patricia Quinn as Magenta, and others reprised their roles. Only the leads, Brad and Janet, were replaced by American actors Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon to attract US audiences.
I'm really an old-fashioned girl. I like a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know. And I think that's all it is, really. It's an action story. It's like Saturday Morning Pictures. In fact, the filming has, from time to time, especially in the laboratory, got very like Saturday Morning Pictures. It was really good.
Filming took place in an old English mansion, but it was the Bay Studios in Oakley Court in 1974, the same location used for Hammer horror movies, which it was actually parodying, which is funny. I give you that. That was funny. That's what I call committing to the bit.
Well, I mean, the excitement to me of the film very much was in the fact that for once there wasn't, something that was created by a very small group of people, which was then taken over by a sort of massive concern and sort of pulped out, but that in fact the people that originally created it and the actors had a lot to do with the, creating the original role, that we've kept the sort of basic core of the original people through the various sort of transformations as the sort of monster has grown.
But the conditions weren't great though. It was freezing, the budget was tight, and production was chaotic. But the cast's theater background gave it energy and camp that no Hollywood movie could actually try to fake. Good on them.
I think the two hardest things have been, well, one, the kind of extravagances, physical extravagances that I used on the stage were very theatrical ones, and I've tried in the film to make them filmic ones. I mean that will do as a film gesture, and on the stage I want to maybe do that.
Well, you got caught flat. Well, how about that? Well, babies, don't you panic. By the light of the night, it'll all seem all right. Once more, please.
When Fox released it in 1975, it bombed. Womp, womp, womp. Mainstream audiences didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't serious enough for horror fans, nor clean enough for musicals, and far too queer for middle America. Goddamn normies.
It's very much a musical, and a lot of the energy of the whole event is in the music. I mean, I think that it is pastiche, certainly, but I think it sort of stands on its own too. I mean, it's beginning to more and more, which is very nice.
I'm not setting out to shock anybody, really. But then again, I never have been, but I seem to have in various other things that I've done.
Most theaters pulled it after a week. Can you imagine that? Doing a whole movie and then getting it pulled off of theaters after just 1 week. That's bad. I've never in my entire experience with working with theater and film ever heard of that happening, and I don't wish that upon any of my enemies. Honestly. Not because I wouldn't want that for my enemies, but because it would kind of crash the market of movie making. But goddamn, 1 week. That's tough. But obviously we have a twist because it wouldn't be a cult classic if it didn't have a twist. The twist came in 1976. A theater in New York began screening it as a midnight movie because that's when the degenerates go to the movies. And audiences, mostly outsider, queer kids, punks, and art students, got it. Like I said, degenerates, because I was anticipating I would say art students because I'm an ex-art student and I'm a degenerate. And maybe I'm a bit queer. And also was punk and still am, so maybe I am the equivalent of a degenerate. Let's change the subject, shall we? So the people attending started dressing up as the characters, shouting lines back, and inventing callbacks like a-hole for Brad and slut for Janet. Prop dances and full audience participation followed, and it became just a whole performance itself. Like, you don't go to see the performance of theater, you become the theater, basically. And that is the moment we can pinpoint as Rocky Horror Picture Show stopped being a failed film and became the most successful cult movie of all time. All kudos to bored-ass art students and lost queer teens. And thank you. We needed that. And we will dive into the psychology of how it clicked with these teens and art students. But first, let's see the main topics of discourse that Rocky Horror brings to the table. Firstly, it's about theatrical liberation. Don't dream it, be it. And there fucking goes my script because my mouse has fallen again. My mouse took "don't dream it, be it" too literal, and I don't like that. Like I was saying, the theme, becoming your truest, most performative self. Come on, boys, bring out the matcha. I'm kidding. How was it expressed? Basically with costumes that are declarations of identity, corsets, pearls, fishnets, and heels that signal freedom from repression. The film itself breaks the fourth wall constantly, showing that life is a stage and everyone is performing a role. You just get to choose which one. Frank-N-Furter embodies self-creation. He literally makes his own lover, Rocky, in his image, which is kind of a creepy thing that we kind of gloss over most times, but we're just gonna gloss over it again, because I'm not gonna talk about it. It's just giving great genes, and I don't want to talk about that. we can see that with other icons that were created throughout time, like the MC from Cabaret.
Welcome, bienvenue, welcome.
Like Ziggy Stardust, made by Bowie.
A lot of people, a lot of the fan mail I get, a lot of it is awfully nice. I mean, they say, how's your baby and how's your wife?
And even Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
All the people I have come upon in my travels, I have to think about the people who have come upon me.
In short, it's about becoming art, not consuming it. Be your own piece of art. And our students get to like have that in the brain from the very first class they have. Because we all have that one artsy kid who's like, I am the first piece of art that you get to see when you see my art. And to be honest, I've been there and I am there. So I'm not judging at all whatsoever. I have a troll t-shirt. And actually, this is a reference to my last video, but sure, ignore it if you want to. The second main theme is sexual awakening and moral transgression, meaning the theme is desire is not a sin. Repressing that desire could be considered the sin itself. Basically, it's expressed through Brad and Janet starting as all-American couple, pure, proper, trapped in the 1950s sexual ideals. And their seduction of Frank is not considered corruption, rather an initiation. The orgy sequence.
Janet! Brad! Rook! Janet! Dr. Scott! Janet! Brad! Rooker!
2 hours later.
Janet! Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The Bros Thinned My World musical part is not about lust, but about claiming ownership of your own body, basically. And I think one of the most magnetizing things for me as a young adult looking at this musical was always the thing that Frank wasn't corrupting, was more of initiating you to feel your feels, basically, which not a lot of people tell you when you're young. And that's great. But we'll get to the psychology in just a second. Let's just finish the main themes. There's really not much to say here. Just give me 2 more minutes. Also, we have to note that clothes and makeup do exaggerate duality. Formal versus fetish, purity versus pleasure. We can see that the casting, having Susan Sarandon's vulnerability and Barry's stiffness, they are deliberately chosen to be that way. They amplify the joy of their later liberation. If there wasn't this contrast between the way that they are to the way that Frank is, we wouldn't realize how distant these two things can be, even though they feel like a small choice, but visually they're explained in a way so we could see that there is a great jump and we can still apply for those choices without being that exaggerated and still like accept part of us. Does it make sense? And we can parallel these to Sally Bowles from Cabaret as the sexual freedom's tragic emblem, or the Dionysian archetype of indulgence as divine truth. And you're gonna ask me, what does archetype mean? And I will explain that in just a second when we get to the psychology of everything. In short, sex is theater and shame is the real villain. End of story. Thirdly, a main theme, camp and parody as a protest. Mock what you fear until it loses its power. It's basically the way we can see that every horror and sci-fi trope is exaggerated to absurdity. Aliens, mad scientists, and gothic castles.
The fact that Frankenstein is now wearing a corset might sort of keep them entertained long enough.
The camp tone disarms fear and judgment. Laughter becomes like rebellion against it. It's an act of queering pop culture itself, turning the monsters into icons. And that's exactly what Gaga did as well, turning the monsters into pop icons. I mean, that's it. I'm sorry. And we can see through casting that Tim Curry's Frank walks the fine line between elegance and grotesque, forcing the audience to confront attraction and discomfort simultaneously. At the same time. Don't make me say simultaneously. There we go. Big brain. Here we can also parallel to Divine and Pink Flamingos or the Joker as a theatrical chaos, especially Nicholson's and Ledger's version of this. In short, drag is a weapon, exaggeration as revolution, and I actually walked the stage in drag once. It's a long story and sounds very problematic the way I picture it now, but basically like I said, I worked with queer people and they were so kind to me. I always envied the way they looked, how cool they were, and they invited me on stage to perform and they helped me with everything, even the choreography and lip sync. It was so good. It was so cool. Anyways, let's get back to the fourth theme. Science, creation, and control would be the fourth theme. Basically, who gets to play God? And why not the outcast? I would live in a world where we'd have Tim Curry's Frank-N-Furter as our god. I wouldn't mind. Basically, Frank's creation of Rocky is a parody of both Frankenstein, but most importantly, it's also a parody of heteronormative beauty ideals. Rocky's perfect body is the projection of Frank's own fantasy, turning the creator into the object of his creation's desire.
I play Frank-N-Furter, who is a kind of new variation on the mad scientist of horror films that we all know and love.
Riffraff, my character's paranoia. I mean, everyone sort of recognises, you know, that's that, when you're going to build me a new body, master. Stop that.
It is parody, but it also, I play it and think it as a kind of grisly reality. And Frank-N-Furter, as a variation on Frankenstein, is obsessed with image and the way that things look. And but I see him and play him as a kind of grisly, real freak.
I'm just a sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania.
Basically, the moral of the story is creation, like identity, is about power, and power is dangerously seducing. So that's what basically makes Frank so seducing. It's not just the way he looks, the way he acts. It's about confidence and the way he pulls power to himself and makes him being basically a top. I should be more serious about this, but this is basically it. It's just Frank being a top. In short, self-creation is divine, but comes with madness. But if we're talking about Frank-N-Furter kind of madness, I mean... okay. And the fifth and final theme would be queerness and the other. Basically, the theme is that the outsiders are actually the ones who know how to live. The aliens from transsexual Transylvania represent the queer other, not monsters, but a liberated species. I'm so glad my roots are Transylvanian. The normal characters are the ones who crumble under pressure. Again, as a Transylvanian descent person right here talking, I fully agree. Jokes aside, queerness is depicted as the evolutionary next step, flamboyant, fluid, and self-aware. And through visuals, we can see the castle as a metaphor for the subconscious, a carnival of hidden desires. And the performance has its own quirks, like every exaggerated movement is a refusal to conform to naturalism. It's queerness as theater. And we can obviously see this as parallels in the Addams families, who are outsiders, but they're super wholesome. Or in the Clockwork Orange, it's like the performative violence is a social critique of what's going on. In short, basically the freaks are freer than the normals. And as a last notable mention, we have to talk about the collapse of fantasy, where the freedom always carries a cost. The ending, where riffraffs and magenta, spoilers, kill Frank, reveals that even the liberation has hierarchies. The dreamy's overtone mirrors post-60s cynicism. Utopia crumbles, but the taste of freedom still lingers somewhere there in the shadows. It's bittersweet. The carnival is gone, but those who experienced it are changed forever. And we can see again parallel icons to Hair, where the ending in death after utopian chaos, in the Truman Show, freedom through destruction of illusion. Basically, after ecstasy comes the echo, but it's kind of worth it. And now the moment everyone's been waiting for. Why is it still relevant and will be for a long time for new audiences from a psychological standpoint? Because this is the thesis that made me want to make this video to begin with.
I don't really mind what happens to it, as long as people remember it.
At the end of the day, when you wipe it off, there's always a little bit left in the cracks.
Now let's talk about archetypes. Rocky Horror works because it's not just camp, it's archetypal. What does archetypal mean? Because I've mentioned it before and I said I would mention it again. Well, in this case, it's about how the story lives in a very solid structure that mirrors a construct of our daily life in different clothes, campy clothes in this specific case. It's almost our world, but it conflicts the protagonist to change in order to partake. And with this archetype and storytelling, depending on the story is trying to depict, it's either liberating the protagonist from its core beliefs or it's corrupting it from what it once stood for. Brad and Janet are the normals who stumble into the world of forbidden. It's pretty much every fairy tale known to man. Even Shrek depicts the bizarre protagonist in a world almost like ours, but in one sense very atypical and unrealistic in some other sense. A place where the main characters we are supposed to have as a standing and relate to have to make a choice to make themselves fit in the narrative. Shrek is literally about this. I mean, don't we all consider ourselves outcasts in our own society and try our best to fit in with the norms? And Frank-N-Furter, he's a trickster, the figure of chaos that breaks the rules, blurs the lines, and flips everything upside down. The trickster is the character that draws you into the world and seduces you to want to be part of it, of this atypical world, and to forget the place where you came from or where you are usually nothing more than typical, a dot in a sea of typical. Basically, it draws you in from the comfort of not standing out and not disrupting and pulls you towards embracing a new way of life, slowly accustoming you to this new normal that by its own beliefs, it's probably very liberating and rebellious. This new you also means that it will make you jaded to your old world, never being able to go back to the way things used to be now that the veil is lifted. Like I said before, you get to experience it, and at the end of everything faded away, at least you got to get the experience, and now you cannot undo that. You cannot forget that. It's a pretext for us to stop hiding our raw selves, the selves we diminish to partake in what normality the world usually demands from us, so we are not considered outcasts. Frank is a rope that we can cling on to say, look, maybe I don't have to be a shallow, obedient soldier, but rather it's safe to flourish with our own quirks and guilty pleasures. We've seen this archetype before, like I mentioned briefly before, MC from Cabaret, who dances on the edge of sexuality and danger just like Frank, or Loki from Norse mythology, who shapeshifts and seduces, even maybe Jack Sparrow, who turns every situation into flamboyant chaos. These characters aren't just entertaining, they liberate us. They act out the taboos we secretly fantasize about breaking. So understanding the archetype of this specific scenario, it's important to now talk about the shadow self. We all have a shadow self. And to the question, why does it hit so hard for the repressed? Why does Rocky hit so specific? Because Rocky Horror is basically a 2-hour ritual for the shadow self. Now, Carl Jung said we all carry a shadow, the desires, the flamboyance, even aggression we cannot express openly. If you grew up repressed, your shadow is bursting with color, with lipstick and fishnets and glitter. Frank and his mention of misfits act out everything the shadow hides. The absurd, the horny, the ridiculous, the dangerous. That's why watching it feels more like fun. It feels like recognition. Frank's house is an oasis where it's safe to play out the things that you're supposed to have been taught to hide or pretend that are not real. As kids, we are taught how to behave and how to pretend that we do not have a specific need or interest, because instead of being taught how to navigate them, we were told just to ignore them, and mostly because our guardians didn't know how to deal with them themselves. And this is very important because we live in an ever-changing society. Each generation of parents are most probably unprepared to guide us. It's an upward spiraling cycle, and they are not really to blame. The youth that grows repressed learns in young adulthood how to navigate a new society, and by the time they become parents themselves or guardians, they are tired because of the process of rewriting their own patterns. They consumed years in learning how to understand the new norms in society and now are too tired to re-begin this entire process from scratch when they have a child. So they just do what they learned by themselves. They do their best trying to teach the new generation to be more open than the past generation, but that is only useful for a specific time period, whilst the child will soon be hit by new norms in this society that is in a continuous process of evolution. So while the parents consume their youth rewriting what they were told, they believe in good faith that their way is the correct way. But by the time the new generation peaks, new standards apply. There is no ill intent in most cases, I guess. It's just the very tiring process of ever adapting to new societal standards. So think about how Fight Club hit young men, no pun intended. It wasn't about boxing, it was about shadow fantasies of violence, rebellion, and freedom. Or how Black Swan spoke to Dancer about obsession and sexual repression. Rocky Horror does that, but with camp, glitter, and a wink. That was the fakest wink I've done in my life. That's better. I can wink better with this eye. So for the show itself, obviously Rocky kind of shows like a shortcut. When you discover Rocky Horror, it doesn't feel like just another musical. It feels like a shortcut to identity. It hands you the permission slips you didn't know you needed. You can be weird. You can blur masculine and feminine. You can be dangerous and playful at the same time. You can live in a permanent Halloween. And no, you don't have to live in that specific aisle at the grocery store. And no, you don't have to make your house be forever Halloween. That's weird. Even for this fandom, that's weird. And now take into consideration everything that I mentioned before with the context and the time it was released. Think about the fact that this premiered in 1975.
Not you guys. Not you guys. Didn't mean you guys.
Whilst in today's social geography, queer culture is much more welcome than it was back then. Rocky Horror, even by today's standards, are a bit dodgy with some political areas of the political compass. But it's not that far-fetched from an open-minded gathering of people. Back in the day though, on the other hand, people dressed like that, even for Halloween mind you, would be quite repulsive for a majority of people. Think of how exotic Kiss, Mick Jagger, or even Bowie were if they weren't characters built to be hidden behind of. They were considered rock stars, and this is why they were allowed to be like that. What I'm trying to say is that Rocky was a way through which people could vicariously live out their fantasy life without drawing in too much attention, even though it's important to note the double features were midnight features like I mentioned before and hidden away towards the dark hours of the night for a reason. No one would want that kind of disruption during a lazy afternoon. Furthermore, not on a Sunday afternoon if we talk about more conservative families or more conservative areas of living. Think of today's America in those conservative areas. You would still not see that on the street today. And this was in 1975. But why does it especially attract the artsy and the repressed? Well, because kids already live in exaggeration and in aesthetic play. They love costume, music, theater, but if you're artsy and you're sexually repressed, you've been living in half color. And Rocky Horror suddenly cracks the saturation to a maximum. It bridges the two worlds you didn't know you wanted together. The theater kid side with songs, singing, and camp aesthetic, with the sexual side, the corsets, the biting, the hedonism. It's maturing both aesthetically and mentally. It's accepting what life offers you as an adult. That exact same overlap is why MC in Cabaret seduces theater people, or why Moulin Rouge felt like a gateway drug to sensuality. It's not just art, it's art with permission to be horny, dangerous, or absurd, or anything else you want to think of. And to answer why Rocky Horror is still so alive today, with or without being part of an active fandom, is basically the idea that it comes with a twist. And here's the twist: you don't need the fandom to feel this. The rituals, the callbacks, the costumes, they're one way of living a Rocky Horror show, obviously, but even if you don't ever step into a midnight screening, watching it on your own, letting it live in your head is more than enough, because the logic isn't external, it's internal. You don't have to scream with the crowd to know that is you. And sometimes sometimes gatekeeping to yourself maybe feels more intimate. Maybe you don't vibe with the whole fandom cringe some people attribute to experiencing being part of a collective. Maybe you feel like the perfect picture escapist work that Rocky provides can be tainted by fandom drama and other similar factors. I mean, it's not a stretch to admit that fandoms can be dramatic, especially when they tie into the theater and subcultures that are sometimes breeding grounds for attention-seeking, non-empathic characters. No space is ever safe from toxicity, sadly, so having Rocky as a cornerstone of your world, but not being active in a collective of fans can be just as valid and just as cathartic as the full deal. It is the same with other cultural icons. Plenty of people never went to see Lady Gaga live in a concert, but still built their identities on her. Plenty of people never read comics, but still became jokers in spirit. The fandom is one of the paths. The self-recognition is the one that matters. That is the main path you have to choose. And lastly, why does Rocky Horror feel like a founding part of identity, even if you've never belonged to the cult of screenings? Because it's not just a film. Like I said, it's an archetype. It's a mirror for the repressed, a shortcut for the artsy, a permission to slip for the weird. Rocky doesn't ask you to join. It dares you to admit you were always already part of it. So don't dream it, be it. And if you like my video, be sure to check out other videos of mine. Be sure to find out what these are on my shirt with my last video. And if you like what you see, please do like, comment, do anything with engagement, because I am not doing anything to promote this channel, and I'm not gonna really, I just want to let it organically grow, and I'm counting on you to help me out with that. So you don't have to subscribe if you don't like my content, but before you make a decision, at least try to give it a chance. Watch one other video and then make your choice. And if you don't want to, you don't want to. I mean, it's free will. You choose what you want to choose. Like, I choose to be a fan of Rocky Horror Picture Show. And if you made it this far, thank you so much. It means so much to me having this long of retention. Most people don't stick around, and I appreciate you being here. So let me know, what do you like most about Rocky Horror, and if you figured out why I'm sitting on a ladder, because that still stands as the greatest mystery of this channel. See you around. There, I said it. I'm really curious how far apart I put these two parts. And as much as I know myself, I'm probably gonna put the end at the end of the video. So sucks to be you. Bye.